Please welcome Nicole Falk, Vice President of Corporate Services at Southern Company, and our distinguished panelists for the fleet electrification, tackling the challenges and seizing the opportunities for electric trucks discussion.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being here with us today to talk about tackling the challenges and seizing the opportunity for fleet electrification. I have a privilege of being on this stage with a great group of panelists today, and I'm going to start on my far right, and I've got Jim Bruce, the Senior Vice President and Chief Energy Policy Officer with UPS. We've got Steve Chris, Director Energy Services, Walmart. Don Fenton, Director Sustainability and Public Affairs for Volvo Group in North America. And next to me, Meredith Alexander with CalStart. The bios for each of these panelists are in your program, and they all play a very important role as we move electrification of our fleets forward. So please take a look at those as you have time. Before I start with this panel, though, I would like to share some thoughts on where we are at Southern Company. And as a former power delivery person and a regulated utility, it's very important for us to understand how this will impact our mission-critical business of providing safe, reliable, and affordable electricity to our customers. So at Georgia Power, we're about to launch a program that we will sub-meter fleet electrification equipment so we can gather the data, both on-road and off-road equipment. That will then help us understand what impact will this have on our grid? How do we mitigate the impact that then has on our grid? But then what are offerings that we can offer to help move this ball forward? So what are those rates? What are those incentives? What are those other programs that we might offer to our customers? So it's a very important time for us. We've got a great group of panelists. I'm excited to hear from them. And when I think about electrification, I think about several things. I think about logistics, I think about infrastructure, but I think about the partnerships, and we've just had an opportunity to spend an hour together, and it's all about the partnerships. How do we work collectively together to bring this forward? So Jim, I'm gonna start with you if that's okay. You guys are part of a huge delivery service opportunity, and you're looking at electric transportation and electric fleets. Why is that so important? You know, we get so excited when we see the brown trucks come into the neighborhoods, but why is that so important for UPS?
I might start by saying that you have to look at what UPS does. We have about 100,000, actually well over 100,000 trucks. And they are all heavy tractor trailers or the step vans that you see, the brown step vans, and that's class 5, 6, and sometimes class 7. So you don't see us using light duty vehicles. You're not gonna see a UPS brown truck delivering a roll of toilet paper to somebody in 2 hours notice. And we are a aggregator of e-commerce. So we deliver a full truck. And if it's a tractor trailer and we're not full, we'll actually sell that capacity to somebody else. But the reason we're interested, to answer your question, Nicole, and we are talking to your company now, I know. The reason we're interested in electrification is there's several reasons. One is, if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions of the United States, they're up in 2 areas: commercial trucking and jet fuel, jet aircraft. We do not have the ability to have renewable jet fuel or all that much renewable diesel fuel. So we've got to find some way to address our carbon footprint. There's no question about that. But the other thing that we're interested in, I've often heard our engineers say that every tractor trailer, diesel tractor trailer that UPS has cost us $30,000 over the life of the truck for the emission control system, just maintaining it. So we're looking for something much simpler and very reliable. I mean, what can go wrong with an electric motor and a battery? So we're looking for a whole lot more reliability, reduced emissions, and for that matter, performance. Not that we want to race Lamborghinis on the highway, but if you do have a lot of torque on that engine, you're able to get up to speed more quickly.
Steve, talking about that reducing emissions, Walmart is very interested in energy management as well as the emission and sustainability. So from your perspective, how do electric fleets fit into your sustainability goals?
Sure, and so I guess to start, I'll give you a little bit of sense of the scale that we're talking about, because there's the scale that most people think about, and then there's Walmart scale, and we tend to be a little bit bigger than most. I mean, we're a $500 billion company, so we do things big. In the U.S., we have over 5,300 stores, 1.5 million associates, and about 176 logistics facilities. In terms of our fleet, we have 6,500 tractors, 8,000 drivers, and the way that we operate is very dynamic and demanding. And I'll get to that in a second. But in terms of our sustainability goals, in 2005, we set an aspirational goal to be 100% renewable. One of the other goals that we set in 2005 was to double our fleet efficiency. And we actually did that from 2005 to 2015. We were able to, let's say, 1 billion more cases with 400+ million less miles driven. And so big money savings, and really in terms of, as we look at our emissions, a big savings there as well. So we look at alternative fuels as the next step of that, and electrification is a big piece of it.
Okay, so Dawn, we talked about it. In order to do this, we've got to have a vehicle to move these things. So what is Volvo's plan? How do we get forward, and how do we move that ball forward with Volvo?
Well, Volvo has been and is committed to bringing battery electric vehicles to market. We have had in our history of the company a long commitment towards environmental sustainability. And our CEOs have often said that we recognize that we're part of the problem, and so we need to be part of the solution as well. And we have been manufacturing and selling electric buses, mostly in Europe, and have done a lot in that space, and now moving into the truck space. Last year, we launched our first Class 8 equivalent trucks in Europe, and they're in customer hands now. And now we're bringing that technology here in North America, and we're doing so in a couple of different ways, and I'll talk a little bit more as we go along, but as part of our Volvo Lights project, which I have some one-pagers that I think they're out in the back, which talks about the project, but this is a project a $90 million project that was funded by the California Air Resources Board, under which we are bringing 23 battery electric vehicles of Class 8 as a commercial pilots in Southern California. But then it doesn't stop there. We also own the Mack brand and Mack trucks. And so Mack is currently working to build an all-electric, or to put into service an all-electric refuse truck. And we've already announced that truck is going to be tested with New York City Department of Sanitation next year, and also with Republic Services in North Carolina. So we definitely see the future is moving towards electric. We're doing what we can to bring that technology to market as soon as possible. And but as a little bit of what we said in the back room is that it's not just bringing a truck to market. There's a lot more that's involved. And in this Volvo Lights project, one of the unique things about it is it's a project of 16 different partners, all in a different space. And when you're talking about bringing electric vehicles, it's we're really talking a paradigm shift, and no one company can do it alone. And so that's why the partnerships are so important. So I'll leave it there.
So Meredith, California has moved, significantly ahead of others. So what is, from your perspective, some of the things they're doing well, and then what's the role that CalSTART plays?
Okay. Well, I will try not to talk too much about all the different things California is doing, but in terms of fleet electrification, California is investing our greenhouse gas reduction fund revenues. Next year, it'll be close to $200 million into our heavy-duty vehicle voucher incentive program, which aims to close the delta between purchasing a traditional diesel vehicle and either a zero-emission or ultra-low NOx vehicle. And CalSTART's actually the administrator of that program, given away 4,000 vehicle vouchers to date and many more thousands in the queue. So again, the goal there is to provide a clear signal to the market that these vehicles, that there's a demand, that the purchases are real, that the purchasers are serious, and that California is really putting its money where its mouth is and trying to transform, not just light duty, which is find a passenger car that's appealing to the masses, but transforming 5 or 6 different classes of vehicles using what CalSTART calls our beachhead strategy. So the early movers being transit buses, airport shuttles, and we see delivery vehicles as being one of the next commercially available parts of our beachhead segment. And then along with that program is the R&D projects also being funded by our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and the Volvo Lights project is a great example of how we think those R&D dollars are moving along market transformation and hopefully helping the manufacturers make different decisions about what vehicles they'll be offering in the next 5 to 10 years.
So Dawn, you touched on this a little bit, but you talked about the market forecast and some of these customers that are kind of pushing you. So what do you look at from Volvo's perspective in the market strategy, and when do you see that kind of shift that this becomes the dominant source of trucks?
Well, I know there's great excitement and anticipation that electric trucks will take over the marketplace, and we certainly are working towards that, but in reality, I mean, diesel trucks are still going to be around for a long time. We're still going to have them for decades. Yeah. That said, you know, the progress is moving quickly now to get more and more Class 8 trucks, electric trucks into the marketplace. And in fact, as part of the Volvo Lights project, we have announced that we are going to be making these commercially available next year in 2020. Also with the Mack trucks and the refuse trucks, we're looking to make those available in short order as well. So they are coming. The concern, and of course everybody wants one, and lots of fleets have asked and they're interested in buying them. But we know as an OEM that quality is number one. And as you said, Jim, I mean, they need to operate. You need to have equivalent uptime. They need to make sense from a financial standpoint and a total cost of ownership. Which is why this Volvo Lights project is so important, because we're learning. You know, I mean, Volvo is not going to put its name out on a product and launch a product unless we're sure that it's going to be reliable, that it's going to serve the customer's needs, that we're able to support it and repair it. There's so much work that has to go on to make a product customer ready. It's not just putting a truck out there and giving it to a customer. I mean, it has to. There's all the other, you know, parts and service and maintenance and training and all of that. And so while we're working diligently to expedite that, we need to also be clear that it's not that they're going to be taking over in the next half dozen years, you know, to be in the majority of the marketplace.
Yeah, to add to that, and one of the things that we're working through is we don't yet have a sense, especially for the Class 8 over-the-road trucks, how we're going to use them yet. So currently, you know, a Walmart tractor, the way that we work with logistics, we send the truck out. It can be out for up to 5 days. It has 1,000 gallons of fuel in the tanks. We don't really fuel on the road. They don't know where stop number 2 is until stop number 1 is done. And we dynamically optimize our logistics in real time. So that piece of it and figuring the charging out is going to require a fairly significant change to that as we look at it in the long term. So as we look at getting, we've got an order with Tesla, as we look at getting those in, we'll see, well, are there deployments we can do in areas where there's good population density and a distribution center nearby? So the Houston area or Southern California, where we can start out with out and backs, you know, daily runs to figure, you know, just get a sense of how they operate, because you know, one of the challenges for us is we don't have that yet. So that's part of the excitement of, you know, getting the trucks in and being able to figure out how does that actually fit into our logistics operation.
So,
I would just add to Don, a couple of Don's points. First, we want the trucks. We're ready to test, but we want them to perform. For any of our alternative fuel vehicles, and we have about 10,000 globally now, we always put them in service. We test them maybe a year. I mean, people are talking about these trucks being available in, say, 2020, maybe 2019. We're going to want to test for a year. And then we're going to roll it into the fleet. We're not going to go junk the trucks we've got. I mean, the brown package car that you see, we call it a package car, it's a truck. that goes through the neighborhood, that lasts 20 years. Then we junk it. Some say we junk the driver with it, but it's not true. These are Teamsters, they're highly paid, but we want 20 years out of that. Now the Class 8 tractor trailer will get 10 to 12 years, but if you start thinking of the time to roll over our existing fleets, you're talking 2 decades.
Right.
And the other thing, to Don's point, is you don't just simply buy the truck. You've got to have, it's a marriage with a local utility. It is a marriage. It's not speed dating. You've got to really be able to trust each other, because we have our own diesel fuel tanks and gasoline tanks. If we run out of fuel, that's on us. But if we're going to turn all of that over to the electric utilities, we have to be able to rely on them. And that's going to take some time. And there's kabuki dance that we're going through with your company right now.
Yeah, it is a lot of partnership with us, and we talked about, you know, having the vehicle ready. We talked about how we're going to use the trucks, and then how we're going to charge. So what are some of the other challenges for the site where this charging will occur? I mean, there's a lot of thoughts, and we talked a lot about that in the room back here, about the things that also have to go on in order to make sure these trucks can actually get on the vehicle and do what they're intended to do after that. So what are some of the other challenges?
So I think, you know, from an infrastructure piece, you know, a typical distribution center that we have, and if I talk too technical, just tell me to stop and I'll turn it into something policy-oriented. And so a typical distribution center is, you know, 2 to 4 megawatts of load. And so it's a good chunk of load on the system. Our utility service is sized for that. So as you start to bring in chargers that can handle these sorts of vehicles that we're talking about, you're talking about incremental 1.5 chunks, or 1.5 megawatt chunks of load. So we have to look at the utility infrastructure to the site, what needs to be added, how much that costs. A lot of our distribution centers are existing sites, so we're not building a lot of new ones. And it's a lot easier to, you know, size infrastructure for a new load than to add infrastructure to an existing load. You know, so at the end of the day, we could be taking a 2 to 4 megawatt site and bringing it up to 10 to 15 megawatts. And so that's obviously a challenge and a big area where we need to work with the utilities because it's their wires. The other piece of it then is going to be the reliability like you talked about, but also that further step into resiliency. So a lot of our distribution centers are in the southeast, so we have to worry about hurricanes, we have to worry about 3 and 4 day outages. So if a storm takes out the DC, it's also taking out the fleet. That's an issue. And then we talked earlier about California as well, with the public safety power shutoffs. The length of the outages are of huge concern as well. So we really have to think through, how are we going to keep the power on? What does that look like? How do we work through, I guess, this is the policy side, the impression of the fact that, at least for the first while, it may be a fossil resource that has to back up our electric vehicles. How does that play into the sustainability equation that, you know, these vehicles are contributing to? And so those are, you know, just looking at it right now, some of the challenges I think we'll have to figure out.
That's why it is such a strong partnership. I mean, we have to understand how you're going to use the vehicle as an electric utility. You know, when's that vehicle going to charge? What's the capacity and the demand that vehicle is going to have on our grid, so we can make sure it's reliable and sustainable, and we have the right resiliency when called upon.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, just for folks in the audience, you know, when you think about the relative size of these things, this isn't just, you know, plug in your car at night and it charges up. You know, if a truck has a megawatt hour battery, instantaneously that's the same amount of power as a supercenter in the summer. So that's a really, really big load. And if we have 150 trucks on site and we have an outage and we even have to charge up half the fleet, that's a lot of power that we have to have access to in very short order. So,
And depending on pricing, you know, whether there's certain demand pricing and depending on what time of day it is, and I mean, you don't always know what is the rate going to be at that time. I mean, sometimes you do, but other times you don't.
I know that California is going first, but not at all alone in designing commercial EV charging rates. At Southern California Edison's has been approved. PG&E's proposed decision yesterday. San Diego's is on the way, but you know, we want to get it right in all of those proceedings for commercial vehicles, and even there, there's not always the awareness of how different the needs of a fleet will be from say, DC fast charging for light-duty vehicles. So I also wanted to mention that a big part of the utility partnership is preparing the site and what we call the Make Ready. So the CPUC has approved $600 million in Make Ready funding, and we're seeing these filings happening all over the country now. Michigan, New York, Con Ed's will hopefully go soon. I think it's going to be $30 million for Make Ready, not all for fleets. And so we're working across the country to try and help everyone understand, the significance that the utility Make Ready investment is really going to be part of the foundation. And then, of course, getting the rates right will also be critical. And so we're really interested in how we can all better share information. As California goes first, everyone can learn, hopefully, from successes and not mistakes. But, we're really seeing things start to move. Colorado, Minnesota, more and more utilities are filing their Make Ready proposals to get approval for those infrastructure investments. And then the distribution upgrades will probably come as the next wave, I think, after Make Ready improvements.
Yeah, and there's a whole broader rate-making picture that goes into this because, the rates are hugely important. One of the things that concerns me, so one of my day jobs is utility rate cases and doing the rate-making process. And we want to be able to integrate the technologies and facilitate them, but not create a new class of subsidized customers. And that's where the rate component is really critical. You could actually design an energy-only rate that's made to recover a customer class's cost. You just have to be okay with 45 cent per kilowatt hour charges, which, for most customers are like, what? 'Cause that's not what we see most of the time. So a big part of it, I came up with the phrase in the back, and I'll use it now, and if it's horrible, just tell me, and I'll never use it again. But you wouldn't open an Italian restaurant without knowing the price of tomatoes. So it's important. Yeah, okay, that was a flop. We're not gonna use that one again. You got to try this stuff out. I see Greg from Madison out there, and I know he's a big fan. So. But ultimately, you have to understand the energy management side of it as you do it. Understanding what your charging cycles are going to look like, what the loading is going to look like, because demand charges aren't your friend if you've got one vehicle and you only charge it every so often. That's a mess. But if we're doing it from a fleet perspective, if it's Walmart or UPS, or we had a vendor come in last week that showed us for their Class 8s what their in and out structure looks like. It actually looks like a fairly high load factor load. That's hard to get out. And so the dynamics of demand charges within rate schedules really depend on what your load factor is. As your load factor improves, having a demand charge there as opposed to everything recovered on an energy charge is beneficial. And it's a matter of sort of sussing out what is that crossover point, and how do I then plan my load to take advantage of that. And so I think that's another key area of utility customer interaction is, how do we look at the rates and how do we work through this to figure out, what we do best. And California, actually one of the easy things about California is the time of use. It's pretty clear. Here's your, the price at this time is this, here's a clock, and you can kind of figure through that. But there are a number of other rate structures out there. I always like to point to the Missouri utilities they're called hours use rates. They're based on your load, the energy charge is based on your load factor. They're the worst rate schedules in the country, and we can talk more about that in another presentation. But those are ones where you're going to get a lot of customers who are going to look at their fleet, they're going to look at their loading, and they're going to say, I have absolutely zero idea how this rate works. And so it's really important to have your account reps, anybody who has customer interaction, trained on the rates and trained on how to do that so customers can plan well.
I just wanna say
Nicole, in the back, Meredith was talking about in the West, there are times of day where the cost of electricity is negative. UPS is trying to buy that electricity.
We want you to buy it, for sure.
I'm saying that half in jest. We will have at a lot of our big depots, once we have, say, 100 or 200 electric trucks, we will have solar cells on the roof. We will have possibly wind. We will be generating power, not because we think we could substitute for the grid. If the grid goes down, we're in terrible shape. It's just so that we would have enough power to buy us some time so that we would stay in a good rate or avoid a peak power rate. but that's about the extent of it.
I just wanted to say that the one really unique thing about fleets is that there isn't just one vehicle application. You know, there's different vehicles and different usage patterns, and so, you know, needing to get everyone to the table to help the utilities and the commissions understand, you know, what rate structures might work for all these different applications, and it's definitely a tough nut to crack.
So Meredith, we did talk a lot about what California is doing. What are some of those lessons learned that other states should adopt or maybe should avoid?
Well, we think that the voucher model is really beneficial because it helps bring down the initial cost, and it's not something you apply for after the fact. You know, the purchaser sees it as an initial reduction in the purchase price. So New York has already replicated that model. They'll be relaunching, I think, this week or next week with an $18 million voucher program. And then also, you know, we're already, like I said, seeing the make-ready move and seeing these applications come in, you know, across the Midwest and the Northeast. And planning for infrastructure, we think, is, you know, the real lesson learned, because we have seen cases in California where folks took vehicle deliveries and they had not planned for infrastructure, or maybe the vehicles came faster than they thought they would. And not every fleet is, you know, UPS or Walmart. We're also talking about public fleets, transit districts. They need a little more hand-holding. And what we also want to avoid is throwaway infrastructure. So right now you have 6 electric buses, but California has a mandate that all your buses need to be electric by 2030, or all your purchases. So are you then going to have to tear out the depot you built and build a whole new one? And that's not just taxpayer, that's ratepayer money that was invested into that. So, you know, just helping folks plan for this rollout and what's reasonable, we think is really the next big need, again, for those fleets that are the first movers.
Okay, good. Well, we've got a couple of minutes for audience questions, so. All right, got a mic coming.
Down in the front.
Good afternoon. My name's Julie Manzari. I work for Dominion Energy. I think this side of the group, you guys have phenomenal skill sets in supply chain management. All 3 of the OEMs and the delivery companies. Have you all reached into your supply chain management groups and actually thought about maybe not depot refueling, but refueling at your delivery points or some other types of opportunities that might exist that your supply chain management groups might understand?
That would be really counter to our culture. We have, our drivers want to come home at night with their families, so all of our truck drivers, whether they're driving tractor trailers or package cars, come back at night. So we refuel there at the depot. It's very rare that we would have an overnighter that goes cross-country and stops. But we would use diesel for that. I mean, the time required, the infrastructure would be very difficult if you're talking about, say, a Class 8 electric tractor.
Yeah, so for us, again, we do most of our fueling at the distribution centers. So for us to move to sort of within our current framework of how we optimize, we would need a national charging network. And also, again, it's a culture change in terms of fueling on the road and what are the protocols and procedures around that. So yeah, that would certainly be a challenge, but we have some really long routes, like, you know, southeastern Wyoming up into northern Montana, that sort of thing. So there's definitely a big infrastructure rollout that would have to happen for us to be able to do on the road.
And this is exactly why Meredith referenced CalStar's beachhead strategy, that, you know, electric trucks are not just going to be able to be adopted in every application right away. I mean, there's certain places where it makes more sense than others, and those return to base kind of applications, or shorter distance refuse trucks, as I mentioned, those kinds of applications. I will say that within the Volvo Lights project, we will have the first public charging station for a Class 8 truck. But it's going to be a long time before those are widespread. There's also going to be the ports of LA and Long Beach are looking to put charging infrastructure there as well, so that way you can get going from the ports to the Inland Empire, and so then instead of having to go back and forth on a charge, you can charge up after halfway. At your halfway point. So, but yeah, it's a challenge.
And for the needs of the longer haul tractor trailers, EPA and DOT have been running regional alternative fuel corridor working groups and looking at how we can actually build out the infrastructure that would be needed for those longer haul vehicles, and like on the West Coast, going up and down I-5. So that obviously requires a lot of coordination, but.
And the other piece of it too, and actually bring up a really good point with the different use cases, where also the shorter term opportunities are yard trucks, which tow the trailers around our DCs. Those don't actually ever leave.
Right.
So that's one where we'd certainly depot charge, but it's a whole different look and a whole different timeline than the over the road.
Hi, Maxine Joslow. I'm a reporter with E&E News, and my question was about something that's been in the news a lot. There's been a lot of hype around it, which is the Rivian deal with Amazon. I was wondering, there's been a lot of excitement about that deal, but I'm hearing you talk about a lot of challenges ahead when it comes to transitioning corporate fleets to electric trucks. What are your thoughts on the Rivian deal and the media coverage of it, and does that excitement sort of belie the challenges ahead?
Okay, I'll comment first, I guess. So we were very excited to see that Rivian. It's not a CalSTART member, but maybe will be soon. But other companies that are also making delivery vehicles, such as Change and Greencraft, making similar type of shorter range, 100 and 150 miles a day. There are hundreds of those in the queue in California as well. So we see it happening hopefully imminently. And those are, we think, the next sector to move after buses and shuttle buses to zero emission. So yes, the challenges are real, but we see that fleets are adopting those vehicles soon, and we hope that they will be delivered on time and that the infrastructure will be in place for them, and we'll all be working to support that.
I would preface my comments by saying that Amazon is a very large customer of UPS. But given that, I shudder to think about buying 25,000 electric vehicles you have not seen yet each year for 4 years. We have press releases, I went back and looked, from 2018 saying that UPS would be deploying in your territory pure battery-powered electric trucks. We didn't do it. We will, but only when it's ready. And that's the thing is, maybe they've seen something we haven't seen, but to put that many trucks, to purchase them, I mean, what if there's a problem? And we're very typical in that we do tell manufacturers, we think you've got a crappy engine. Go back and redo it. So this idea of a rolling laboratory has served us well. Putting trucks in service before you commit to a large procurement. I would say one other thing. We have done purchase at scale with natural gas trucks. We have 6,800 trucks powered by natural gas. A lot of them, and soon all of them, on renewable natural gas, like from methane. So their carbon footprint is actually less than an electric truck, just because the grid is not perfectly green. But there's only so much renewable natural gas out there. But we know how to deploy at scale when the trucks are ready.
Other questions from our audience? All right, let's do a lightning round. What is the one challenge or the policy that we need to address to actually move this ball forward? Jim, I'll start with you.
Walk for a while in our shoes if you're an electric utility. Understand that every morning and every UPS depot is a choreography, a brown choreography of trucks going out and in the night coming back in. If you want to sell us trucks, be sure you can dance with us. We don't want to change the dance. We want you to work within the limits of our choreography.
So for us, I think infrastructure standards around charging, we didn't really get to that today, but that's a really big thing for us. We have very limited space at the distribution centers. We can't have 40 different types of chargers. One would be great, thank you. So get to work. And then resiliency and making sure that the power stays on so we can keep the fleet going.
I would say for us, some of our biggest concerns right now in terms of expediting and bringing these to market are the availability of the charging infrastructure and at the level so that our customers have that in place and they've done the investments to bring up the power needs that they have, the costs around that, and the cost around the vehicle themselves, having some kind of purchase incentives, because I think I heard somebody on the previous panel say, new technology always costs more, and it does, and these electric vehicles are going to be more than today's diesel truck, and it's going to be, that's UPS and Walmart are going to be hard pressed to pay that much more for trucks. Think about your smaller fleets that are not going to be able to purchase and experience these unless there are sufficient purchase incentives available to help.
Well, that leads into what I was going to say, which is purchase incentives. Even in California, most, I find, of our elected officials don't understand that there's no commercial tax credit for electric vehicle purchases like there is for, if you're not buying a Tesla, you can get one as an individual. So in the absence of that, we also think that a national voucher program would have an incredible impact in further transforming the market because we are trying to transform the market for 6 different classes of vehicles. And that's incredibly challenging. But look how successful we've been with light bulbs and solar panels. So if we could do that for vehicles through a national program, we think that it would be extremely successful.
Yeah. Well, I think we've talked a lot about partnerships today and how it's going to take each of us to be successful in moving electric transportation forward and especially around our fleet. So I want to thank y'all. Y'all been a great panel, shared a lot of great insight. So please join me in thanking our panel today.